So I'm now going to introduce Professor Helen Dodd. So Helen is Professor of Child Psychology at the University of Reading, and Helen is a UKRI Future Leaders Fellow researching adventurous play and anxiety. So thanks for joining us, Helen.
Thanks, Emily. I'll just switch to my slides. Okay, hopefully everybody can see those okay?
Yeah.
Okay, brilliant. Thanks for inviting me along, and thanks for that great talk, Wendy. So I'm going to try and pick up a bit where Wendy left off. But first, my background is in anxiety in children. And so I just want to provide some context of where we were at before we found ourselves in this situation. And that is that anxiety disorders were the most common emotional disorder affecting children. And that was where we were at before we had any issues of lockdown, any pandemic happening. So already a high proportion of children were being affected by anxiety disorders, and even more children having raised levels of anxiety, but maybe not at that level where they've got an anxiety disorder. And so one of the things that I've been working on together with colleagues at the University of Oxford, including Cathy Cresswell, who's the lead for Emerging Minds and is on this call, is a project called the Co-Space study. And the link for that is here. I realise that's quite long, but the slides will be shared afterwards. If you follow that link, you can sign up to take part in the study, and we are still looking for families to join us. And you can also read the first reports that have come out from that study. So what we wanted to do was to track how children's mental health is doing during the lockdown and as lockdown gets eased. So we're going into this knowing that anxiety disorders are the most common emotional disorder, and we're really concerned about what's happening with children's mental health now. So that's something we're trying to track in these projects. The longitudinal analysis showing what's happening over time to children's emotional well-being will be published hopefully within the next week or so. And we now have 3 waves or 3 lots of data collection with those families. But just to give you a taste of some of the initial findings that are coming out of that study. So one is that over 50% of parents are worried about their child's emotional well-being. And so that's really gives us an indication that kids might not be doing so well. And particularly, Wendy just picked up this idea from my own research that children are feeling lonely and are missing out on this social interaction. The parents also told us that child behaviour is rarely a concern if your child does not have special educational needs, but it's frequently a concern for parents whose children have special educational needs. So I think it's worth keeping in mind that we're not all dealing with exactly the same situation at home here, and that some children and some families might be having more difficulties with the challenges that they face during lockdown. And parents tell us that they want support around emotional well-being, around children's education, and around transitioning out of lockdown. So hopefully some of the work that we're going to talk about today and that Wendy's already talked about will help those of you who are listening think about how can we address some of these concerns that parents have got. I should also mention that the Co-Space study has a sister study, which is the Co-Spice study, which is for parents of 2 to 4 year olds, whereas Co-Space is school-age children. I've just been looking initially at the first 1,700 parents who've taken part in that study. And the take-home messages here are very similar. So a high proportion worried about emotional well-being and parents wanting that support around emotional well-being and transitioning out of lockdown. So as we start to think about what coming out of lockdown might look like and how we might start to ease those restrictions, I think it's really important, as Wendy said, to acknowledge that children have all had different experiences and children will be feeling differently about coming out of lockdown. So some children will be desperate to get back out, desperate to get back to school and see their friends. And other children might find coming out of lockdown quite challenging. So they might feel anxiety about being back in social situations, returning to school, or they might feel anxious about catching the virus themselves or their family members catching it. And so it's worth keeping in mind that children are going to be coming out of lockdown with very different experiences and very different feelings about being back in those situations. So what we want to talk about today is how play might help with that transition and help children prepare and be ready and settle in when they return to school and when lockdown is eased generally. So in the first one of these Emerging Minds webinar series, I spoke about free play and the benefits of free play, and this slide is stolen from that presentation. So if you're interested in hearing a bit more about this and a bit more about thinking how parents can support children's anxiety, then I recommend having a listen, and that webinar is available. So I briefly wanted to touch on this today, but just to say that free play happens when children decide what they're going to do, when they're going to start, when they're going to stop. And as adults, our job is to take a back seat there and to let children lead, to let them work out what they want to do, and really only interfere with their play if they invite us to. And we know from research that free play is enjoyable for children. They like having that control to decide what it is that they want to do. And they tend, obviously, to find things they want to do that they enjoy. It increases children's sense of control because they are choosing what they want to do. And for that small moment in that specific situation, they have control over what's happening. It can help them make sense of things. So Wendy already spoke about coronavirus-related play, and we're seeing quite a bit of that. It's just they use these play experiences to help them understand what's going on around them. It helps children to express themselves. So if they're feeling angry or feeling sad, they can express that through their play. And it can also help support relationships. So this is true of parent-child relationships, but also other relationships. So if you're a teacher or a caregiver, allowing children the space to play and to lead play can help support that relationship. So providing time and space for children to just play, to work out what they want to do and to let them lead the play is really beneficial. And we did already have a question on the Q&A around play in adolescence. And I think that this is also true for adolescents. It's also true for adults, right? If we are given space to do the things that we want to do and that we enjoy, we feel better. It helps us have that sense of control. So it's also true for adolescents. So if that is that they want to go and play on Minecraft or they want to chat online with a friend, then probably that's a good thing to let them do right now whilst they're facing this challenging situation. So we also know that this type of play, free play, reduces stress and negative emotion. So there's research showing that children who are hospitalised, for example, if they're given time to play freely, then their stress levels decrease. So this isn't just kind of a nice idea that play is warm and fluffy and makes everybody feel good, but there is research showing, when children are in restricted situations, when they play freely, that benefits them. We also see this when children are admitted to hospital for treatments. So anxiety-provoking situations, their anxiety is lower and they have fewer negative emotions generally when they take part in a play-based intervention. So we know that play can reduce stress and negative emotion. And that's particularly relevant right now, I think, when we're thinking about children, not only in the current situation, but as we transition out of it and what that might look like for them. So play is good, free play is good. There are ways that we can make it even better. And one of those ways is to take it outdoors. So being outdoors is good for mental health. It's also good for physical health, but that's not the focus here. But when we're outdoors, we move more. So in terms of physical health, it's also good to be outdoors. So there's research showing that the more time children spend outdoors, the better their mental health is. And this especially seems to be the case for girls. And the more important children feel it is to be connected to nature, also the better their mental health is. So that supports this idea that being outdoors in itself is good for mental health, but also more than that, being in nature and connected to nature is good for mental health as well. So I just wanted to pick up a bit more on that idea about being in nature and the benefits of that. So there's a range of benefits. So just briefly picking up some main take-home messages from research in this area. We know that visits to nature are associated with decreased stress. So if you go and spend time in a forest or go and spend time by the sea, how stressed you feel will decrease. We know that even viewing natural environments reduces physiological measures of stress. So even seeing pictures of the forests can make us feel better and reduce that kind of blood pressure and those physiological measures of stress in our bodies. And for children, spending time in nature leads to improvements in mental health and emotion regulation. So play is good, free play is good, being outside is even better, and being in nature is even better. So when children are in nature, often one of the ways that they play is adventurously. I define adventurous play as exciting, thrilling play where the child experiences a level of fear and is able to take age-appropriate risks. So this is also termed risky play in some of the literature that some of you might be familiar with. So when children take, interrupted by my children there, when children take risks when they're playing outside, just age-appropriate risks where they're leading and they're working out what they want to do, it helps them to increase their ability to cope and their understanding of their own, what they can cope with, what's too much for them, and what they're able to manage. It decreases some of that avoidance that can happen around anxiety-provoking situations, and help them to explore those feelings of uncertainty and handle them, as Wendy said, in a play, relatively safe situation. So by trying out some of these feelings in that play situation, they may be better able to cope with them when they're in other situations. It can also lead to that physiological arousal, so your hands are sweaty, your heart's beating fast because you've climbed high up the tree, but because it's happening in a play context, it makes you feel good and positive rather than being scary and something that children feel that they can't handle. The other thing to say about this type of play is that children really enjoy it. So there's some research, there's some quotes here from children about taking risks and playing in this exciting, thrilling way. And so I'll just read out a couple of these. So one is, I did it once and I did okay, and I felt happy and scared at the same time. I couldn't stop myself. And you feel excited because you're out of your comfort zone but enjoying yourself. I feel free and confident and on top of the world because I'm really high. So this is this idea of this kind of scary, funny emotion that children experience. And I think we also experience it as adults when we're pushing ourselves out of our comfort zone a little bit. We've got control of the situation. It's a little bit scary, but it's also quite exciting and fun. And so this type of play can benefit children. And we hope, at the moment it's tricky for children to be playing like this, but as lockdown is eased and as we return to normality, it would be nice, I think, for children to be able to be taking these risks, because at the moment their play is quite restricted at home. So my take-home messages to support children now and after lockdown: give them time and space to play freely, let them play outdoors. If you have access to green or natural space, then make sure you use it, and give them space to explore and take age-appropriate risks in their play. And I think these messages are relevant whether you're a parent or whether you're a head teacher or a teacher or an early years educator. Give them some time and space to play, let them play outdoors, let them play in nature if they can. So we've put together a list here of resources. I know lots of you are probably interested in exactly what can you do. So you've got a load of kids coming back to school next week or returning to an early years setting or to a holiday context. What can you do to support their play while social distancing is in place? What kind of things might you be able to do? And there's some fantastic organisations who've put together resources. And this last one was written, I found it on Twitter and asked if I could share it, and it's got lots and lots of practical ideas about different games that you can play with children whilst still socially distancing, and those are just some of the key references. Thanks.
Brilliant, thank you, Helen. And we've had, as we've been chatting, we've had questions flooding in, so we've got lots of really interesting questions there. If you've got any other questions, then do pop them in that question and answer box. And I think we're going to go to Helen, aren't we? Sorry, to Wendy, who's going to make a few final points, I think.
Okay, yes. I just thought I'd end with a summary of guidance from some work that we've been doing in a European project called Play Friendly Schools. The website is here. There are some freely available resources aimed at schools, but actually a lot of the information is useful more broadly than that. So going back to what I was saying and picking up on what Helen was saying as well, is that often our role as adults isn't to provide play. We can't provide play. Play is an experience. We can provide for it, but the way that I describe it is that if we pay attention to the conditions for play, then it will happen of its own accord. Those conditions will vary for different children, different ages, different approaches. And one of the questions that I saw was anxious children who might not be able to engage in stuff. Then that's all the whole paying attention point is, to find out for individual children how space works and what those conditions are. And what we've done in these resources, and what has been done elsewhere in the resources that Helen also had in her PowerPoint, which you'll be able to get, particularly from the 4 NGOs, from Play Wales, Play Scotland, Play England, Play Board Northern Ireland, who I know are here today. Some really useful resources in how to support children's play. And often we look at those in terms of time, space and permission, kind of three very interrelated, very hard to separate them out, aspects of the conditions that will support play. So children need enough time. Although the example I gave in the story was a fleeting moment, and those moments are really important, children also need significant blocks of time in order to immerse themselves, in order to play out traumatic events. So they may be obviously related to their anxieties to do with COVID-19, they may be less obviously related, but therapeutic theories of play hold that children will use play to play out stuff, and that may take time. They need time to move enough for their bodies to benefit, and mental health is very intimately tied up with physical health as well. And they also need sufficient time, if they're playing with others, to develop play narratives, for the play narratives to become embedded. All that falling out and negotiating that has to happen before the actual play can start. Very often they never get around to playing. It's all about talking about how they're going to do it rather than getting there. So that's time. Space, I could go on for hours about space and I won't. It's the area of research that I'm particularly interested in. And spaces are created through everything in them, in the way that I talked about the girl on the train. But this is a list of stuff, I suppose, that we should try and make sure that any play space, indoors or outdoors, should try and provide. So that's variety, diversity. Loose parts and modifiable space is all about children being able to manipulate stuff themselves. So a good abundant supply of stuff that can be used in all sorts of ways, and that doesn't matter if it gets trashed. That's my definition of loose parts. Spaces to hide, make dens, spaces to be up high and see what's going on, space to move around, opportunities to play with all of the senses, 5 and more, their identity and with concepts. And the final one is looking at permission. And this isn't literal permission. It's, can I do this? It's not that. It's about the culture of a space, how we create a culture that says you can play here, that has an overall playful feel. And that's to do with the overall culture of the institution or the home, of the relationships within it, and of the material objects. That's how these things all are totally interrelated. And it's about working proactively to develop a culture that respects and supports children's play, that doesn't dismiss the trivial as trivial. The trivial is important, that understands the need to tell rude jokes, that understands the importance of rough and tumble play and of taking risks for the sheer thrill that that gives rise to, and that's more than just fun. It's crucially important for children's mental health. And I want to end with a tale of 2 schools, basically. Thank you very much, social media. The one on the left, I have to say, we don't know what the context is for this school in France. But if that's their idea of allowing children to play while maintaining physical distance rules, and that's it, I think that's quite a sad picture. The one on the right is from a Danish school where the children said, we really want to play football with each other. And what he created, this teacher, was human table football. So you can see that the string through the tabards means that these children can only go up and down. They can't run around the football pitch. An incredibly creative and playful response. And these are two extremes, I think. What gets me about all of the guidance that is coming out from our own government, but also from UNESCO, is that the big focus is on preventing transmission and on catching up educationally when children go back to school. What we have been arguing for in the Play First campaign is that those two things are very important, and we must pay attention to children's social and emotional health, and we do that through creating opportunities for play to happen like this. So I'll end there. Oh, actually, sorry. My references are in my presentation. So if you download the presentation, you'll be able to find the references. Thank you very much.